A classroom contains 13 boys and 18 girls. If a student's name is chosen randomly, what is the probability it will be a girl's name? To find probability, we need to write a fraction. And that fraction will be how many girls' names there are out of how many total names there are. So since there are 18 girls, that means we have 18 girl names to choose from. Out of, now we have to add in the 13 boys to get our total. So 18 plus 13 is 31. So 18 names out of a total of 31 names are going to be girls. If we look at our answers though, our answers are not in fraction form. Our answers are all in percentage. So we need to convert our fraction into a decimal and then into a percent. So to convert our fraction into a decimal, we just divide. 18 divided by 31. 31 can't be divided into 18, but we can add a decimal and a 0. 31 does go into 180 5 times. 31 times 5 is 155. Borrow from the 8 becomes a 7. Then we have 10 minus 5, which is 5. And 7 minus 5, which is 2. Then we add a 0 and bring it down. And 31 goes into 250 8 times. 31 times 8 is 248. We subtract and we get 2. Then you can add a 0 and bring it down. But 31 doesn't go into 20. So we get 0. Goes into 20 0 times. Now we can stop here because if you look at your answers, they don't go beyond 2 numbers. And to change our decimal into a percent, we just move our decimal 2 places to the right. So 58 hundredths is equal to 58%, which is answer C. If a circle has a diameter of 12 centimeters, what is its area? The formula for area of a circle is pi times radius squared. We need to know what the radius of our circle is. We're given diameter, which is 12 centimeters. The diameter is twice the radius, or the radius is half of the diameter. So half of 12 centimeters would be 6 centimeters. So that means our radius is 6 centimeters. So we take our radius and substitute it into our formula. So area is pi times 6 centimeters squared. So the area is 6 squared, 36, pi centimeters squared. But if we look at our answers, none of our answers have pi in them. So that means that these answers are multiplied times pi. If you have a calculator, then you can just multiply 36 times pi in the calculator. But if you don't have a calculator, then pi is approximately 3 14/100. So take 3 14/100 and multiply that times 36. 6 times 4 is 24. Write the 4, carry the 2. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. 6 times 3 is 18. Get rid of that. Put a 0 placeholder to move on to the 3. 3 times 4 is 12. Write the 2 and carry the 1. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. And 3 times 3 is 9. Now add these up. 4 plus 0 is 4. 8 plus 2 is 10. Write the 0, carry the 1. 8, 9 plus 4 is 13. Write the 3, carry the 1. 9, 10, 11. Now, we have two numbers behind the decimal place in our numbers we multiplied together, so that means that our product must also have two numbers behind the decimal place. So our answer would be 113 centimeters squared, which is answer choice B. Solve for x using the following system of equations. 3y plus 10x equals 23. 18y minus 15x equals 50. There are many different ways to solve a system of equations. One is by graphing. You would graph the two lines and then see where they intersect. The solution is the ordered pair of the intersection of those lines, because the intersection is the only ordered pair that will satisfy both equations and make them both true, since it's the only point they have in common. You can also use substitution. That's where you solve for one variable and then substitute that expression into the other equation. And then there's elimination. And that's the method we're going to use now to solve for x. Since we want to solve for x, we want to eliminate y. And eliminate means to get rid of. To get rid of y, I need to multiply this whole equation by a negative 6. Because negative 6 times 3y is negative 18y. And then when I add my two equations together, 18y and negative 18y will cancel or eliminate. Negative 6 times 10x is negative 60x. And negative 6 times 23 is negative. 6 times 20 is 120. 6 times 3 is 18, so 138. And now I need to add my two equations together. 18y and negative 18y is 0. They cancel. Negative 15x and negative 60x is negative 75x. Equals negative 138 and 50. When I add those together, I'm going to get a negative, and I can subtract off to the side here. That's 8, and 13 minus 5 is 8, so negative 88. Finally, to solve for x, we need to divide both sides by negative 75. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, and 75 divided by 75 is 1, times x is x. And again, a negative divided by a negative will give me a positive. And we can divide those off to the side. 75 goes into 88 one time. 75 times 1 is 75. We subtract and we get 13. Add a decimal and a 0, bring it down. 75 goes into 130 one time. 75 times 1 is 75. Subtract, and we get 55. Add a 0 and bring it down. And 75 goes into 550, I believe, 7 times. 7 times 70 is 490. 7 times 5 is 35, so that'd be 525. We subtract and we get 25. Add a 0, bring it down. And we could keep on going, dividing until we find the end. But since this is multiple choice, we can already see which answer choice is correct. And that would be answer B, 1 17/100. Simplify the following expression. 64x to the fourth plus 8x cubed minus 4x squared plus 16x, all divided by 8x. So really what we have here is 4 separate fractions. I'm going to break this up. 64x to the fourth divided by 8x plus 8x cubed divided by 8x minus 4x squared divided by 8x plus 16x divided by 8x. Every single term is divided by 8x. So now we can take each one of these individually and divide by 8x. 64 divided by 8 is 8. And x to the fourth divided by x, well, let's see what that looks like. X to the fourth divided by x is x times x times x times x times itself 4 times, x to the fourth, divided by x. X divided by x is 1, so those cancel. And what you're left with is x cubed. So x to the fourth divided by x is x cubed. Plus 8 divided by 8 is 1 times, and then we do the same thing with x cubed divided by x. So x cubed divided by x would be x times x times x divided by x. X divided by x is 1, so you're left with x times x, x squared. Minus 4 divided by 8. 4 can't really be divided by 8, but we can simplify 4/8 as 1/2. And then x squared divided by x. You may have noticed from these 2 examples before that when we divide by x, what we're doing, or really when we divide at all, what we're doing is subtracting the exponents. So x to the fourth minus x to the first, or x to the 4 minus 1, x cubed. So here we have x to the 3 minus 1, x squared. So now we have x squared minus 1, or just x, plus 16 divided by 8 is 2, and x divided by x is 1. So our answer is 8x cubed plus x squared minus 1/2 x plus 2, which is answer B. Simplify the following expression. The quantity 2x minus 20 times the quantity 5x plus 10. To multiply these 2 binomials, we can use a method called FOIL. And FOIL stands for first, O stands for outer, I stands for inner, and L stands for last. So the F first means to multiply the first term in the first binomial times the first term in the second binomial. First times first. 2x times 5x. 2 times 5 is 10. And x times x is x squared. So it's 10x squared. The O again stands for outer. So that means to multiply the 2 outside terms. So 2x and 10 are the 2 terms on the outside, the outer terms. So 2x times 10, 2 times 10 is 20, 2x times 10 is 20x. I stands for inner. That means to multiply the two terms on the inside. So that would be this negative 20 times 5x. Negative 20 times 5x. A negative times a positive is a negative. 20 times 5x is 100x. Then finally, we multiply the last terms together. So that means the last term in the first set of parentheses or in the first binomial times the last term in the second binomial. Last times last. So that's negative 20 times 10, which is negative 200. A negative times a positive is a negative. We're almost done. The last thing we need to do is combine these like terms right here. 20x and negative 100x. So it's really 20x minus 100x. Bring down the 10x squared first. And 20x minus 100x would be negative 80x. Then bring down the negative 200. So looking at our answer choices, looks like answer A would be the correct answer. On a 6-sided die, each side has a number between 1 and 6. What is the probability of throwing a 3 or a 4? This die has 6 sides. That means our total is 6, which is the denominator of our fraction for finding our probability. We want to know what the probability of throwing a 3 or, and that is a key word, 3 or a 4. So if it lands on either one of those, we're good. So that's 2 different numbers that we could land on out of our 6 different numbers. And then of course we can simplify our fraction by dividing the numerator and the denominator both by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 6 divided by 2 is 3, so it's 1 in 3. Or, written like this, a 1 in 3 chance. Simplify 9x times the quantity 3x squared plus 2x minus 9. To simplify, we need to distribute the 9x to all the terms inside the parentheses. And what that means is we have to multiply. So we multiply first 9x times 3x squared. 9 times 3 is 27. X times x squared is x cubed. Plus 9x times 2x, 9 times 2 is 18. X times x is x squared. Minus 9x times 9. 9 times 9 is 81x. And that would be answer choice B. 27x cubed plus 18x squared minus 81x. So remember that when you multiply x times x squared, you're adding the exponents. And that's where the x cubed comes from. X times x, again, you're adding those exponents, and those have an imaginary exponent of a 1, both of them. So x to the first times x to the first is x squared. You add the exponents, 1 plus 1. And then 9x times 9 is 81x, or negative 81x because of the minus in front of the 9. Solve for x in the following inequality. 4x plus 23 is greater than negative 3x minus 6. The first thing we want to do is get all of our x terms on the same side of the inequality. I'm going to do this by adding 3x to both sides. 4x plus 3x is 7x. bring down the plus 23. And bring down the greater than sign. Negative 3x plus 3x, those are additive inverses, so they cancel. Bring down the negative 6. Next, we want to remove 23. The opposite of adding 23 is subtracting 23. So subtract 23 from both sides. Bring down the 7x. Plus 23 and negative 23 are additive inverses, so they cancel. Bring down the greater than sign. Negative 6 and negative 23, they have the same signs, they're both negative, which means our answer is negative, and we just add the numbers together. 23 plus 6 is 29, so it's negative 29. Finally, we have to divide both sides by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1, and 1 times x is simply x. Bring down the greater than sign. And then the first thing I'll do is change this into a mixed number. Since I can't actually divide negative 29 by 7 and get an integer. So 7 goes into negative 29 4 times. So it's negative 4. 4 times 7 is 28. So that means that there's 1 left over out of 7. So it's negative 4 and 1/7. X is greater than negative 4 and 1/7. Now if we look at the answers, you'll see that all the answers are in decimal form. And we can find out what 1/7 is as a decimal by dividing. So 7 doesn't go into 1, so we'll have to put a decimal here, which means bring a decimal to the top and add a 0 to it. 7 does go into 10 one time. 7 times 1 is 7. We subtract and we get 3. Add another 0, bring it down, and 7 goes into 30 4 times. 7 times 4 is 28. We subtract and we get 2. And we can stop there because all of our answers stop at the hundredths place as well. So we could write this as x is greater than negative 4 and 14 hundredths, which is answer choice A. Calculate the point of intersection for the following lines. 6x plus 3y equals 24, and 5y minus 10 equals 15x. There are a few different methods for finding the intersection of two lines. One is graphing. And you can just graph the two lines and find where they meet. Sometimes, though, that can be hard, especially when your answers look like this. You can also use elimination, or, like we're going to do on this problem, you can use substitution. And in order to substitute, I need to solve for one of my variables. Looking at my two equations, it looks like it's going to be pretty easy to get y alone in this second equation. And I'll do it in 2 steps. First, we add 10 to both sides. Bring down the 5y. Negative 10 plus 10 is 0, equals, these are not like terms, so just write them down. Then we need to divide everything by the coefficient of y, which is 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1, times y is y, equals 15x divided by 5 is 3x, and 10 divided by 5 is 2, so plus 2. Now that I've solved for y, I can substitute this expression, 3x plus 2, in my other equation for y. So I'm going to substitute that right there, which means that I now have 6x plus 3 times, Instead of y, I'm replacing it with the expression 3x plus 2 equals 24. And now we need to solve for x by first distributing. So 6x plus 3 times 3x is 9x. 3 times 2 is 6, so plus 6 equals 24. Next, we need to combine like terms. 6x plus 9x is 15x. Plus 6 equals 24. Then, we need to subtract 6 from both sides. So 15x equals 18. And finally, we need to divide both sides by the coefficient of x, 15. That's 1 times x is x equals 18 divided by 15. We can do that right over here. 15 goes into 18 one time. That's 15. Subtract and you get 3. Add a decimal and a 0. Bring it down. And 15 goes into 30 two times. So 1 2/10. Now we're halfway there. And once you find x, it actually gets a whole lot easier to find y. Now that we know what x equals, we can use this expression, or this equation, y equals 3x plus 2, and simply substitute what x is into this equation, and we'll have y. So I'm going to replace x with 1 2/10. So y equals 1 2/10 times 3 is 3 6/10 plus 2. So y equals 5 6/10. Finally, we need to put both of these coordinates together as an ordered pair. X is 1 2/10 and y is 5 6/10, which means our answer is C. Factor the following expression: 9x squared y minus 18xy minus 27y. The first thing we need to do in factoring is to look and see if there's a GCF for our terms. So I'm going to write down our terms: 9x squared y, 18xy, and 27y. And then I'm going to factor them to see if I can find a GCF. The prime factorization of 9 is 3 times 3, and then x squared, so that's times x, and then times y. So that is the prime factorization of this term. 18 is 2 times 9, and 9 is 3 times 3, times x times y. 27 is 3 times 9, and 9 is 3 times 3, times y. Now to find the GCF, we look for what all three of our terms have in common. All three of our terms have a 3 in common. All three of our terms have another 3 in common. And all three of our terms have a y in common. So the GCF is 3 times 3 times y, 9y. Now we can factor out the GCF. So we're going to factor out a 9y from each one of our terms. 9y times x squared would be 9x squared y. 9y times negative 2x would be negative 18xy. And 9y times negative 3 would be negative 27y. Now we need to look and see if we can factor this trinomial. So bring down the 9y. And if this trinomial can be factored, we're going to factor it into two binomials. Well, I know that I'm going to have x and x as my first term in each set of parentheses, because x times x is x squared. Now the numbers that go here have to multiply to give me -3 and add to give me -2. So we need numbers that, we need the factors of -3 that have a sum of -2. Put that in parentheses. The factors of -3 that have a sum of -2. And the only factors of -3 that would have a sum of -2 would be -3 and +1. So -3 and +1. -3 times 1 is -3, and -3 plus 1 is -2. And we can always FOIL it out to see if it does, in fact, we did factor correctly. So x times x would give us our x squared. X times 1 is 1x, minus 3x would be -2x, and then -3 times 1 would be -3. So this is our factored answer, which is answer choice C. What is the value of 6 factorial? What 6 factorial means is 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And so since we're just multiplying a series of numbers, you can multiply them in any order you want. So you can take any two numbers and multiply those together first, and then continue multiplying. But I'll just multiply them in order. So we have 6 times 5, which is 30, times 4, times 3, times 2, times 1. Then we can multiply 30 times 4. We have 30, 60, 90, 120. So 30 times 4 is 120, times 3, times 2, times 1. Then 120 times 3, 120 times 3. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 1 is 3. So 360 times 2 times 1. And 360 times 2. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 6 is 12. Carry the 1. 2 times 3 is 6. Plus 1 is 7. So 720 times 1. And 720 times 1 is just 720. So 6 factorial is equal to 720. Answer C. Which of the following lines is perpendicular to the line y equals -5x plus 27? Perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. The slope in this equation is -5. Because this equation is in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b, where the m is the slope. So the slope of this line is -5. The slope of a line that's perpendicular to this line would have an opposite reciprocal slope. Opposite meaning opposite sign. So instead of negative, the slope will be positive. And then reciprocal, meaning simply to flip the fraction. So this is 5/1. The reciprocal would be 1/5. And again, it's a positive 1/5 because it has to be the opposite. So -5/1, the opposite reciprocal is positive 1/5. Looking at the answer choices, the only line with a slope of positive 1/5 is answer choice C. So that's the line that's perpendicular to our original line. If x divided by 3 plus 7 equals 35, what is the value of x? I'm going to start by writing this problem. X divided by 3 plus 7 equals 35. The first thing we want to do is subtract 7 from both sides, because a positive 7 and a negative 7 are additive inverses of each other and they cancel. So on the left side, we're left with x divided by 3. And on the right side, 35 minus 7 is 28. The opposite of dividing by 3 is multiplying by 3. So now we need to multiply both sides by 3. If you put this 3 over 1, now you're multiplying two fractions together, and the numerator and this denominator cross cancel, and you're simply left with x divided by 1, which is just x. So now if we determine what 28 times 3 is, we'll have our answer. 3 times 8 is 24, so write the 4 and carry the 2. And 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. So that means that x is 84, which is answer C. What is the value of x? In x squared plus 12x plus 36 equals 0. We need to find what number we could substitute for x that would make this equation true. And there's more than one way to do this. One way would be to use the quadratic equation, which is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. And the a, b, and c, those are just the coefficients of your, a is the coefficient of your x squared term, b is the coefficient of your x term, and the c is your constant. But there is another way to solve this that may even be a little bit easier than using the quadratic equation, and that is to factor. So I'm going to factor this trinomial into a binomial times a binomial. I know that x times x is x squared. What I need to find out is what my second numbers are in each set of parentheses. And these two numbers need to have a product of 36 and a sum of 12. And the only two numbers that have a product of 36 and a sum of 12 are 6 and 6. And you can always FOIL what you factored to check and see if it is in fact correct. So you could multiply x times x, and that's x squared, that's your first terms. Outer x times 6, 6x. Inner 6 times x, 6x. And last 6 times 6, 36. Then you combine like terms, x squared plus 12x plus 36. And we can see that we did factor correctly, because whenever I FOILed my binomials back out, I got what I started with. So now what we have is that some number times another number is 0. And the only way you can multiply numbers together and get 0 is if at least one of your numbers is 0. That means that either this number, x plus 6, has to be 0, or this number, x plus 6, has to be 0. And now we just need to solve our equations. To solve for x, we need to subtract 6 from both sides. So we have x equals negative 6. Or, again, to solve for x, we need to subtract 6 from both sides. So we have x equals negative 6. That means that x is either negative 6 or it's negative 6. And you can substitute that solution back in for x and check to see that it really does work. So that's negative 6 squared plus 12 times negative 6 plus 36. And what I want to know is, does that equal 0? Negative 6 squared and negative 6 times a negative 6 is 36. Plus 12 times negative 6 is negative 72. Plus 36. And again, I want to know if that equals 0. 36 and 36 is 72. Plus negative 72. And I need to know if that equals 0. 72 plus a negative 72 is in fact 0. 0 does equal 0. So we can see that we solved our equation correctly. We found the value of x, negative 6. The quantity y plus 10 squared minus 625 equals 0. Solve for y. The first thing we want to do is add 625 to both sides, because doing that is going to help us get y alone and thus solve for it. So we bring down our quantity y plus 10 squared. Negative 625 plus 625 is 0, so that just cancels out. And that equals 0 plus 625, which is 625. Well, then we want to get rid of this squared because our y is kind of locked in those parentheses. So to unlock them, we want to do the opposite of squaring, which is square rooting. So we square root both sides. And the square root and the square undo each other. They're the exact opposites of each other. So they cancel each other out, and we're just left with y plus 10 equals, and when I take the square root of 625, I get plus or minus 25. And that's because a positive 25 squared would give me 625, but also a negative 25 squared would give me 625. So we really have two answers there. So we write it with a plus or minus. And finally, to solve for y, we need to subtract 10 from both sides. So we have y plus 10 minus 10 is 0, so equals negative 10 plus or minus 25. We have two answers, and to find them, we just need to simplify. So we have y equals negative 10 plus 25, and y equals negative 10 minus 25. All I did was separate the plus or the minus into two separate expressions. Negative 10 plus 25 is 15, while negative 10 minus 25 is negative 35. So our solutions are that y is 15 or negative 35, which is answer D. If 2x squared equals negative 4x squared plus 216, what is the value of x? I'm going to start by rewriting this problem so I have a little more room to work with it. And if we're trying to solve for x, then we'll need to get all our x's together. So I'm going to add 4x squared to both sides so that way on the right-hand side, it'll cancel because I have a negative 4x squared and a positive 4x squared, and those are additive inverses. Now on the left-hand side, 2x squared plus 4x squared is 6x squared. Bring down the equal sign and bring down 216. So this is 6 times x squared. So to get rid of this 6, we do the opposite of multiplying, which is dividing. Divide both sides by 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1, and 1 times x squared is simply x squared. So those 6's cancel. And that equals, and now we can take 216 and divide it by 6. 6 does not go into 2, but it does go into 21. And 6 times 3 is 18. It goes in 3 times and we get 18. 21 minus 18 is 3. We bring down the 6. And 6 goes into 36 6 times. 6 times 6 is 36. So when we subtract, we get a 0 remainder. So that means that 216 divided by 6 is 36. So now we know what x squared equals, but we still haven't found what x equals. So to get x alone, we need to do the opposite of squaring x. And the opposite of squaring is 2 square root. So we square root both sides. The square root of x squared is simply x. And the square root of 36 is 6. So that means that x is 6. Answer C. What is the midpoint of points A, negative 28, and B, 5, 3? To find the midpoint, we can use the midpoint formula, which is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, then y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And if you look closely, you'll notice what you're doing is you're adding your endpoint x coordinates together and dividing by 2. That's an average, or the middle of those two numbers. So it makes sense that if you're trying to find the midpoint, that you would find the middle of your x coordinates and then also the middle of your y coordinates. And then you'll end up with a midpoint. So now I'm going to label my ordered pairs x1, y1, and x2, y2. So that now I can substitute. So my midpoint is x1 is negative 20 and x2 is 5. So negative 20 plus 5 divided by 2. And then I'll add my y's and divide by 2. So 8 plus 3 divided by 2. And now we just need to simplify. Negative 20 plus 5 is negative 15 divided by 2. And 8 plus 3 is 11 divided by 2. Negative 15 divided by 2, that's a negative divided by a positive, that's a negative. And it's negative 7.5. And then 11 divided by 2 is positive 5.5. So that is answer choice D. If 2x equals 5x minus 30, what is the value of x? The first thing we want to do to solve for x is to get all of our x terms on the same side of the equal sign. We have 2x on the left side of the equal sign, and we have 5x on the right side of the equal sign. We have two options here. We can either subtract 2x from both sides, and that way we would get rid of 2x on the left side, or we can subtract 5x from both sides and get rid of 5x on the right side. I'm going to subtract 5x from both sides. This is called the subtraction property of equality. Because I have the left side equal to the right side, then I could subtract the same thing from both sides, and they'll still be equal. 2x minus 5x is negative 3x. We bring down our equal sign. 5x minus 5x is 0 because those are additive inverses, so we've canceled that out. And what we have left on the right side is negative 30. Now we have negative 3 times x is equal to negative 30. So to solve for x, we need to do the opposite of multiplying by a negative 3, which is dividing both sides by a negative 3. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is 1. And 1 times x is just x. So we have x equals negative 30 divided by negative 3. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. And 30 divided by 3 is 10. So x equals 10, which is answer choice A. In the following equation, solve for x by factoring. 2x squared minus 7x equals x squared minus 12. In order to factor, we need to get all of our terms on the same side. So that means subtracting an x squared from both sides so that we have x squared now minus 7x, and then adding 12 to both sides. So now this is plus 12 equals 0. Now we're ready to factor. So I have a binomial, and a binomial equals 0. I know my first two terms are going to be, or my first term in each binomial, because x times x gives me x squared. To find these second numbers in each binomial, these numbers must be factors of 12 that add to be negative 7. Let's start by looking at the factors of 12. 1 and 12 are factors of 12. 2 and 6 are factors of 12. And also 3 and 4 are factors of 12. Now again, these numbers have to add to give us a negative 7, while also multiplying to give us a positive 12. The only way these numbers can do both those things is if they're both negative. Because a negative times a negative will give us the positive 12, but when we add the two negatives together, we'll get our negative 7. So negative 1 and negative 12, that's negative 13, not negative 7. Doesn't work. Negative 2 and negative 6 is negative 8, not negative 7. Doesn't work. But negative 3 and negative 4 does give me negative 7. So I found my numbers, negative 3 and negative 4. And then if you just FOIL, you can check your answer to see if it's correct. So we do first times first, x times x, x squared. Outer, x times negative 4 is negative 4x. Then the inner, negative 3 times x, negative 3x. So you have negative 4x plus negative 3x, which is the middle term, negative 7x. And then finally the last, negative 3 times negative 4, which is a positive 12. So now we've checked and we know that we factored correctly. But we still haven't solved for x. Here we have two expressions that we're multiplying together, and that gives us 0. The only way you can multiply two numbers together and get 0 is if one of them is 0. So that means that either x minus 3 must be 0 or x minus 4 must be 0. And now we just solve each equation. So add 3 and 3. Those cancel because they're additive inverses, and x equals 3. Or add 4 and add 4. And those cancel because they're additive inverses, and x equals 4. So that means x equals 3 and 4, which is answer B. (7m plus 43 equals 160. What is the value of m? So first I'm going to rewrite my equation. 7m plus 43 equals 160. We want to know what number multiplied times 7 with 43 added to that would give us 160. And we could guess and check numbers until we found a number that would satisfy this equation. But there's a much easier and more direct way. And that is to undo the operations that are done to our variable m. We're going to start by undoing the addition of 43. So we're going to subtract 43 from both sides. And as long as we do that to both sides, we keep our equation equal and balanced. If you have something that's equal to something else, and you take away the same amount from both of those things, then they'll still be equal to each other. So we bring down the 7m. Positive 43 minus 43 is 0, so those cancel. And we bring down the equals, and then we have to subtract. And I can't take 3 from 0, so I'll borrow from the 6, that's a 5. Then I have 10 minus 3 is 7, 5 minus 4 is 1, and I bring down my 1 because 1 minus 0 is 1, so 117. Now I have to undo this 7 times m, and the opposite of multiplying times 7 is dividing by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1, and 1 times m is m. 117 divided by 7, I'm not sure what that is, so I'm going to divide off to the side. 7 goes into 11 one time. 7 times 1 is 7. When you subtract, you get 4. And then we bring down the 7. 7 goes into 47 6 times. 7 times 6 is 42. We subtract and we get 5. Then we add a decimal and a 0 and bring it down. 7 goes into 50 7 times. 7 times 7 is 49. We subtract and we get 1. We add a 0 and bring it down. 7 goes into 10 one time. 7 times 1 is 7. We subtract and we get 3. And we could keep going. But really, that's all I need to find my answer. The 1 tells the 7 to stay the same if we're rounding to the tenths place. So our answer is 16 and 7/10, which is answer choice B. Solve for y in the following inequality. Negative 2y is greater than or equal to 24 plus 6. So the first thing we want to do is combine these like terms, 24 plus 6. So we have negative 2y is greater than or equal to, and 24 plus 6 is 30. To solve for y, we need to divide by a negative 2. Since we have negative 2 times y, to undo that and get y alone, we divide both sides by negative 2. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1, and 1 times y leaves us with just y. Now, since we divided both sides by a negative, we have to flip our inequality sign. It was greater than or equal to, so now it's less than or equal to. And 30 divided by a negative 2, a positive number divided by a negative number is a negative number. and 30 divided by 2 is 15. That means that y is less than or equal to negative 15, which is answer choice C. If w equals 7, calculate the value of the following expression: 8w squared minus 12w plus the quantity of 4w minus 5 plus 6. In order to simplify, the first thing we need to do is substitute 7 for w. So we start by bringing down the 8. We're going to replace w with 7, so it's 8 times 7 squared minus 12. Again, replace w with 7, so times 7 plus, bring down the parentheses, 4 times w, or times 7, minus 5 plus 6. In order to simplify this, we must follow the order of operations, or PEMDAS. We start with parentheses, then exponents, then we multiply and divide from left to right, and finally we add and subtract from left to right. So that means we need to start with anything inside parentheses. So here we have a couple of different operations inside our parentheses. We have multiplication and subtraction. Well, again, if we consult PEMDAS, we can see that we're supposed to always multiply and divide before we add and subtract. So that means we're starting with 4 times 7. So you'll just copy everything else. The 8 times 7 squared minus 12 times 7 plus, bring down the parentheses. Finally, we get to 4 times 7, 28, minus 5, and bring down the plus 6. So we haven't finished simplifying what's in our parentheses, and that's what we'll do now. 28 minus 5. So bring down the 8 times 7 squared minus 12 times 7 plus 28 minus 5 is 23 plus 6. Now if we go back to PEMDAS, after parentheses, which we have no more of, we then simplify any exponents. And we do have exponents right here, 7 squared. So that's what we'll do next. 8 times 7 squared means 7 times 7, and that's 49. Minus 12 times 7 plus 23 plus 6. Okay, after exponents is our multiplication and division from left to right. So first we see 8 times 49. We can just go off to the side and multiply that. 49 times 8. 8 times 9 is 72, so write the 2 and carry the 7. 8 times 4 is 32. 32 plus 7 is 392. So we have 392 minus 12 times 7 plus 23 plus 6. We need to continue multiplying and dividing from left to right. So next I see 12 times 7. So we'll multiply that. 12 times 7. 7 times 2 is 14. Write the 4, carry the 1. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 1 is 8. So that's 84. Bring down the 392 minus 84 plus 23 plus 6. So all we have left now is our addition and subtraction from left to right. So we start with 392 minus 84. I'll do that over here. So we have to borrow from the 9, it becomes an 8. We have 12 here. 12 minus 4 is 8. 8 minus 8 is 0, and we bring down the 3. So we have 308 plus 23 plus 6. So that means we need to add 23 to our 308. That's the next thing we're going to do. 8 plus 3 is 11. Carry the 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. And bring your 3 down. So we have 331 plus 6. And that's the last thing we're going to do is add 6 to 331. So we get 733. Our final answer is 337, which is answer choice C. Solve for y using the following system of equations. 2x minus 6y equals 12. Negative 6x plus 4y equals 42. There are several ways to solve a system of equations. What you need to keep in mind is that what you're doing is finding where these two lines intersect on a graph. So you can graph. That's one way to solve a system, is to graph both the lines and see where they intersect. And then in this case, just give the y coordinate. But you can also use substitution or elimination. And it's really your choice which one seems the best for the situation. In this situation, elimination seems to be the easiest choice. Because if I multiply this top equation by 3, I'll have a positive 6x term and a negative 6x term that will eliminate, thus allowing me to solve for y. So I'm going to multiply this entire top equation by 3. 3 times 2x is 6x. 3 times negative 6y is negative 18y. And 3 times 12 is 36. Now I'm just going to add these two equations together. Negative 6x and 6x is 0. They cancel. 14y and negative 18y is negative 4y. Bring down the equals. 42 plus 36 is 78. Then to solve for y, I need to divide both sides by negative 4. Negative 4 divided by negative 4 is 1 times y is y equals a positive divided by a negative is a negative. And then I just need to go off to the side and divide 78 by 4. 4 goes into 7 one time. 4 times 1 is 4. You subtract and get 3. Bring down the 8. 4 goes into 38 9 times. 4 times 9 is 36. Subtract and you get 2. Add a decimal, and a 0. Bring it down. And 4 goes into 20 5 times. 4 times 5 is 20. Subtract and you get a remainder of 0. So it's negative 19 and 5/10, which is answer A. (9x minus 3y plus 8xy minus 3). If x equals 10 and y equals negative 2, what is the value of this expression? First, we need to substitute. 9 times x, and we're replacing x with 10. So 9 times 10 minus 3 times y, and we're replacing y with negative 2. Plus 8 times x times y, so times 10 times negative 2, minus 3. Now we need to follow our order of operations. First would be grouping symbols, but in this case there aren't any. Next would be exponents, and again we don't have any. So after that is multiplication and division, working from left to right. Starting at the left, we have 9 times 10, which is 90, minus 3 times negative 2, plus 8 times 10 times negative 2, minus 3. Our next set of multiplication would be right here. So I'm going to bring down my 90 minus 3 times negative 2 is negative 6, plus 8 times 10 times negative 2 minus 3. Our next set of multiplication would be 8 times 10. So we have 90 minus a negative 6 plus 8 times 10 is 80 times negative 2 minus 3. Then we need to multiply 80 times negative 2. So we bring down our 90 minus negative 6 plus 80 times negative 2. A positive times a negative is a negative, so negative 160 minus 3. Now that we've taken care of all the multiplication, we're now going to work with addition and subtraction, again from left to right. So starting on the left, we're going to start with 90 minus a negative 6. Minus a negative, you can think of this like you're taking away a negative, which is the same as adding a positive, or you can add the inverse. So we have 90 plus 6, 96, plus negative 160 minus 3. Again, we've got to continue working from left to right. So next we have 96 plus negative 160. These two numbers have different signs. 96 is positive, while 160 is negative. Since they have different signs, we need to subtract them. So I'll do that off to the side. 160 minus 96. So to borrow from the 6, it becomes a 5. 10 minus 6 is 4. Now borrow from the 1, it becomes a 0. So I have 15 minus 9 is 6. So 160 minus 96 is 64. And it's going to be a negative 64 because 160, or negative 160, has a larger absolute value than 96 does. So negative 64 minus 3. And the last thing we do is subtract those numbers. So if you think about where you are in the number line, you're at way over here on the left at negative 64. And then you subtract 3, so you're moving more to the left. Your number's getting even smaller. So that's negative 67. Another way to think about it is you have 64 negatives and 3 negatives. That's a total of 67 negatives. And finally, even another way to think about it is you can change it to adding the inverse. So you have negative 64 plus negative 3. Either way, you're going to get negative 67. And that's answer A. Simplify the following expression. The quantity 2x squared plus 3 times the quantity 2x minus 1. To simplify, we need to FOIL. The F in FOIL stands for first. So we're going to take the first term in our first binomial and multiply it times the first term in our second binomial. First and first. 2x squared times 2x. 2 times 2 is 4. X squared times x is x cubed. Next we do O, which stands for outer. So those are the two terms on the outside, which would be 2x squared and negative 1. So 2x squared times a negative 1 is negative 2x squared. Then our inner terms are the two terms on the inside, 3 times 2x, which is a positive 6x. And then finally, our last terms. So the last term in the first set of parentheses and the last term in the second set of parentheses. 3 times negative 1, which is negative 3. Then we'd want to look and see if we had any like terms to combine, and we don't. We have a cubic x term, a squared x term, an x term, and then just a constant. So that's our answer, which matches answer choice A.